Okay, cool. Hi, folks. So, Christina's microphone isn't working today, so I'll probably just get started. I saw it is being recorded, so it's perfectly fine. And hopefully today's session is of your interest. Let me share my screen real quick. So today's session, I'm not entirely sure how long it will be. It shouldn't be too long. But basically, my name is Noah. I'm from Taiwan. For the past a couple of years, I've been working with the open source community in Taiwan. I've been working on a couple of things, including the decentralized identity slash digital identity for Taiwan. Also, I was working on how DAOs can be implemented locally in Taiwan. What kind of roles does DAO um, play in our society in a helpful and useful way? And the third one is retroactive funding. So a lot of like public goods, digital, especially digital public goods talks that we were having right now is based on this. And today I will go through basically the history of a little bit of the history of how Taiwan's open source community has started, how it has evolved, the challenges and problems that it's facing, and some potential solutions that we are looking at and thinking about at this point. Um, Christina, would that be okay? Is there anything else I should pay attention to while sharing? Okay, cool. I'll just go ahead and start. Um, so basically, I do want to make an introduction of this organization that I was a part of, called GovZero. So I cannot represent this organization. It's a decentralized organization since 10 years ago. I didn't participate in the first like 8 to 9 years. I only participated in the recent 1 to 2 years. So GovZero is actually very interesting because it's been a decentralized organization for many years already, and it has done some very interesting things. So I guess I'll talk about how it started first. So it actually started from a um, student protest against our legislative bureau or legislative yuan that we talk about. So there are some certain like rules, especially when it's about like personal data when it comes to China and others, like sharing with China, because there was a time that the government was talking about sharing our data with Chinese government and others. And there are other issues also that the students or the society basically just isn't very happy with. So there was this protest called the Sunflower protest. And the Sunflower protest, basically a lot of the students or a lot of the protesters occupied or took seats inside the legislative yuan. And at that time, because all the process, people demand all the process to be seen, and a lot of people want to see what's actually happening in this government building and all that. So in that place, there was a lot of requests, for example, live streaming, or like keeping people updated, or getting people's opinion getting people's opinion to the inside of the government building, government departments, and all that. So it requires a coordinated effort for people to come together and do something, right? So that's basically how when GovZero, so it's G0V, right? It's so pronounced GovZero. And so that's how basically GovZero started. And also, the GovZero connotation is also very interesting because the original intent was to basically replace, because everything, all the government websites ends with .gov, right? So they wanted to end every website with .gov, G0V. So not to replace, but to showcase that there's a better alternative for all the government websites, because the government website was not very good back then. And so that was basically a movement where people were trying to showcase that we can do better. And so in the very beginning, including this sunflower movement, including all these different protests being done during that process, there was, so it amassed, gathered a large group of hackers, local hackers in Taiwan, and their main mentality is basically just to open up government data, right? The opening up the government data was a big thing back then, to showcase that, okay, how much money the government has raised, or how much money they have spent on certain things. So there's this very interesting case that back then, because the people were trying to see how much, like, what's it called, the donations to whoever's government officials who are running campaigns, and the data is actually can be open, but the only way people can get their hands around that data is basically just to go to a government official building and print it out. It cannot be accessed online. It cannot be accessed in a very scalable way. So the GovZero basically coordinated and go to like all these different government departments, buildings, or units to and coordinate on who should print which part from what year to from what year, what month to what year, and basically print them, scan them, and publish all of these information online, so people have easier access to it. That's a very apparently a very manual way of doing this, but that's one of the things GovZero did. So GovZero in the past 10 years, they amassed a lot of like Slack users. The main communications are on Slack. So 14,000 Slack users and around a thousand Slack channels. So every single channel is one project, right? So this is a self-proposed project. The one thing that's what sustained GovZero from 10 years till now is basically there's this 2-month bi-monthly hackathon that it's hosting. And so every 2 months they will host a hackathon. A couple hundred people will come. Every 2 years they will host a summit. The last one just ended. Well, basically the foundation of this community is basically the hackathon. So what happens at every hackathon is that people will bring their own project. They will propose their own project on stage and see who would like to join them. And by the end of the day, they will present their results, just like every single hackathon. Only all the projects is mostly about how do we improve like social good, how do we improve things. So this has happened for 10 years. There are 5 summits, 63 hackathons throughout the years, and a lot of different proposals, as you can see, and everything needs to be on GitHub, so everything needs to be open source. That's at least what the community says. So if you have some knowledge of Taiwan, if you know who Audrey Tang is, Audrey Tang was the digital minister of Taiwan. She's recently just stepped down, but she also was from the GovZero community and was a really big part of it. So this was from last year, and I think the GovZero community a very interesting has some very interesting culture. So how did I think for us who are like researching about DAOs, about decentralized organizations, we would want to hope to know that how what we can learn from organization like GovZero, right? Because it's sustained for so long, we will want to know how, we will want to know why, and I think one of the things that GovZero that made GovZero interesting is this decision making model that's very different from the DAOs we see today, right? There are a lot of DAOs out there that are like we're voting for things, we're making proposals, and make sure everybody's on board. And so GovZero never voted. GovZero, because it is a decentralized organization, so it basically um, never does very unified decision making from all these different people. And the reason I think, and the closest decision they got to at a certain point was if GovZero was gonna become a political party. And the reason that got close is because that's a topic that a lot of people are very interested in. But in the end, it also didn't come through. So there was no vote, and the decision making process within GovZero is actually very uh, interesting. So basically, people propose stuff, and everything, whatever people do, it needs to be open source, right? And as long as it's open sourced, then if you do not agree with whatever direction this guy is taking, you can basically just fork it and do exactly uh, 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 the same project with your own alteration or with your own preference of how you think the project should be done. So the decision making process is not voting, right? It's simply just actions. Actions are the votes that people do. If you want something to happen, you would just try to do it. And because everything's open sourced, so there's no stopping you from taking something and moving forward in the direction you will want. As you can probably imagine, there are a lot of failed projects, right? But there are in the past 10 years, there are also many successful projects. One example that if you go to the GovZero, let me see, if you go to the GovZero uh, uh, website, there are like some projects that you can see. For example, there's this one called Kofax. So Kofax is basically a messenger bot that you can ask them if a certain news or a certain information is true. People will verify it for you and then give you a reply. Of course, they are doing a lot of things with AI these days. And during COVID times, there's also this kind of this service, basically just saying where the basically open up government data, visualize government data, and telling people where you can actually get a mask from various clinics. So this was not done by the government. They probably should, but because this is not done, and this is considered important public goods that would actually help people to to get masks during the bad times. So this is something that they did, which everybody in Taiwan did. Taiwan used. There were, for example, central government budget visualization. This is something they did all along, and a lot of different things that's been happening in the GovZero community, which we consider more or less a success, right? So this is basically what GovZero did. So around 2 years ago, I tried to do a research on because GovZero is facing this problem that its momentum is coming down, and a lot less young people or people from universities, especially when GovZero started from the student protest, student activities. A lot less students are interested in joining GovZero, so they were trying to see why, and they were trying to try to understand how might they be able to do better. So back then, I did do a research. I was trying to see, okay, what is the main motivation? Because everyone is a volunteer, right? For this decentralized, everyone is a volunteer, and no one really basically gets paid. Some projects based on whatever they're doing, they can get resources and all that, but not every most of the people who are there just because they want to be there. So I was researching a lot of different incentives from project leaders or from a bunch of different people, and see how we can basically get the organization going. So we started building like incentive systems and all that. And basically at the same time, I'm not sure if people are familiar with Funding the Commons, which is a global event that talks about how we can fund public goods, especially digital public goods, either in Web3 or in Web2 society. So in 2022, I basically participated in the first Funding Commons in New York. So I was actually there for NFT NYC, but accidentally jumped into Funding Commons, and they were talking about various different funding mechanisms for public goods, which really interested me and found very relevant to the things we did. So my intention was basically just to bring this bring this event back to Asia. So the next year, so we kicked off a local community called DAO0, which is DA0. So it's a reference. It's also an extension of GovZero, because under GovZero, there are like a lot of different projects, right? And I think GovZero also, in a way, they used a very good word. Instead of calling them decentralized community, they basically call themselves polycentric community. And the reason being, after so many years of trial and errors, they found that decentralized communities is, at least to their context, it's not that practical. And polycentric, with every single project leaders leading their own way, is potentially and possibly more practical. So, and DAO0 is one of those efforts that got a lot of attention. And our goal was basically just to supercharge GovZero, right? To find GovZero its own way going forward, and to help the community sustain in a way. So what we were trying to do is basically trying to drive global resource into the community. And because this is a very interesting field of experimentation of this civic movement, of this civic organization, so it was highly possible that a lot of these, for example, Funding the Commons, the funding mechanisms can be used within the context of GovZero, of this community, to or maybe to reward the participants or the impactful projects retroactively or in other ways. But anyway, that was the directions which we were trying to make to import resources, import experiments, and try to run these experiments and exploit results based on what we did in Taiwan. So in 2023, sorry, these are in Chinese. I didn't get to change them, but we did a lot of things like decentralized identities research, DAO research, retroactive funding research. We did a lot of like different pilots for Taiwan's decentralized and digital ID program. We did a lot of incentive mechanisms that try to incentivize the GovZero community to go forward, to incentivize people to contribute, maybe to record record their contributions and the sort, and see if that works, right? We we basically brought a lot of different funding mechanisms into the community. Like I just mentioned, we did a lot of retroactive funding to the projects. We basically, one thing we did was we gathered, it's actually very interesting because GovZero as a community that existed for 10 years, in the beginning, they are actually very resistant to Web3 mechanisms or Web3 or tokens and stuff because they thought it was, a lot of them were scams, right? So, and we had to like talk to a couple of projects, get them to involve in the very small like Gitcoin round and get people to vote and basically deliver this. So at least last year we distributed not that many, maybe 30K, 20K funding to different projects, so they were able to get funding for the servers or whatever, and to continue. And slowly we gain a little more trust from these projects that they will be willing to try these kind of funding mechanisms and to try these kind of to try to get tokens. And in a way, we also have to provide them to change it to cash, a way to change it to cash, so they would build trust gradually, right? So beyond that, there were a lot of like different conferences that we did. The biggest one, of course, was Funding Commons last year. Happens the very first time in Asia. Last year we also did Plurality Taipei. We did a lot of different things, invited people like Vitalik, Aya, and others to be a part of the events. So these were also part of the experience. The podcasts and stuff, these I won't talk too much about. But as you can see, we did a lot of different things back then, trying to, in a very decentralized way, trying to make sure that we're progressing and trying to help communities bring new blood, new energies, and all that. So this was the Funding Commons Taipei that we did last year. And so one thing that was one question that we had for ourselves is, of course, did we really help this community to go forward? Did we really help in a meaningful way that for the community to actually push themselves forward? So like I said, we did. I'm not entirely sure how much knowledge of retroactive funding, public goods, or even things like hypercerts the people here are familiar with. But I can do a very quick explanation of what this thing, what hypercerts is. So hypercerts was experiment that initiated by Protocol Labs, and basically what they had, there was this. It started with German charity organization called Project Together. So Project Together, basically what they do is they raise funds, they buy food and distribute food to refugees, right, in Europe. And during the outburst of the Ukrainian war, what they did was they basically didn't raise any funds, but they got food and they distributed to the refugees. And the result was very interesting. The result was that they got 10 times, 20 times more donations than any of their previous projects. And one assumption, of course, is Ukrainian war has a high profile, people wanted to help. But another explanation, another assumption they had was that post-impact funding is better than, it is much less risky than pre-impact funding, right? Because the impact already happened, so you're basically simply just trying to fund something that already have impact. You wouldn't be funding something and they have a chance to fail, or the organization might not execute as well as you would like, or maybe they just run away with the money. Who knows, right? So retroactive funding is basically that, and if for the people who participated in contributing to the results gets a certain kind of impact certificate, and if that impact certificate can be bought and sold on secondary markets, then those post donations can just simply used to buy out these so-called impact certificates. So that's basically the idea. So what we did was that for the 5, 6, 7 projects that participated in the experiment, we asked them to give out impact certificates based on people's contributions inside their projects. So the 5 projects, every single one of them gave out impact certificates. It's very much like giving out stocks, right? For people who contributed, or people who participated. In the traditional sense, that would be on top of salary, but in the GovZero context, they basically just give out the impact certificate. And then the second thing is we did this quadratic voting stuff among these 5 projects, and among including other people in the community to vote which project has the most impact, and then we allocate the funding pool to these 5 to 6 different projects based on that the result of the vote. And then for each project, they will use that money to buy back the hypercert, the impact certificates from these various different projects. So so did that really help? So our takeaway is maybe a little bit, right? But this year in April, GovZero basically posted something saying that, okay, if you can remember, the foundation of the GovZero program, the organization community is basically a bi-monthly hackathon, right? They basically posted that, okay, so we might not have enough funding. They even if they sustained for 10 years nonstop, they might not have enough funding to actually continue this bi-monthly big hackathons. So they will need people's donation to go forward. So that was a big shock to us. Although we did a lot of like different things, none of them were trying to resolve the root cause or the root issue that GovZero really had, which is sustainable funding, right? Even though it is a voluntary community, they will still need something like this, a foundation or a place, not a place, this event to basically to gather people together, to make sure they have a stage, to make sure they are connecting with one another, like-minded people are connected and building projects together. So this was a big shock to us because we didn't expect this to be a thing. So, like I said, do we really help? Maybe just a little. How might we really help? And sustainable funding is probably still the answer to all these, especially public goods, open source, communities, projects, these kind of ecosystems that really needs support. And if we do want to help, because DAO Zero was a decentralized structure as well, kind of decentralized community approach really helped, which is we believe is debatable. And so decentralized community, we also I personally also came to a conclusion where that decentralized community and centralized organizations both have their strong suits, right? So for centralized organizations, they are better at execution, but for decentralized organizations, it's better at exploration. Centralized organizations are basically a lot of people going towards one goal. So it's like a triangle. There's a single mission, there's a single vision, and everyone just basically took apart going towards the same mission and vision. But I don't think that's the case for decentralized communities, despite a lot of people still set goals for decentralized community. I think the decentralized communities are more like a inverted triangle, where it doesn't share a common goal or mission or vision, but basically it shares the same starting point instead. So take GovZero for example. So GovZero's starting point is a lot of it is actually anger, right? So anger fuels the community, fuels these gatherings that people think they will need to do something, and people based on the same values instead of same vision, people based on the same values and started doing very different things. It can be live streaming whatever is happening in protest. It can be open up government. It can be a lot of different things. But it's going a lot of different directions, and people are leading themselves. So the job of a leader inside these organizations is not to manage or to direct like centralized organization, right? But instead, it is to support and to nurture that these actions being taken and going towards the different directions as the holder of these projects will want to go. So this is my personal takeaway of how DAOs or how decentralized communities should be like. But if that's the case, and if the goal is to find sustainable funding for these projects, then decentralized organizations is probably maybe not the best way. So recently we were talking to Japan's also the equivalent of GovZero in Japan, which is Code for Japan. Also talk to them about sustainable funding. And we were currently developing a new way to sustain these open source communities and to sustain these community who is building basically public goods. So it's called the endowment fund model. So it's actually quite simple. It's so usually we raise funds and we spend that fund, right? But now we're together with Japan. We're raising $50 million US dollars, and we use that $50 million to buy low risk financial assets. For example, like the US Treasury or a lot of different like national treasuries and treasury bonds and the sort. With this low risk, every single year there will be a 5% profit based on this, right? No matter what we bought, but basically the direction, of course, low risk and enough return. Then with that, we'll have $2.5 million per year. That $2.5 million will based on quadratic funding, quadratic voting, or whatever. That money will be used to fill the the project, these public goods projects, to fill one ecosystem. One Every single fund will fill one ecosystem, like the GovZero uh, uh, GovZero ecosystem or community, to make it more sustainable. At least the foundation of it, for example, the hackathons, will be able still to continue. And so one thing we are doing is this thing called Dragon Fund, and Dragon Fund is as said, is started by Code for Japan's founder Haosaki, and it's a Japan-Taiwan joint fund, which we will use it to fund the disaster prevention projects, open source disaster prevention projects, especially digital projects in both countries. And in this case, both countries can use, because we face the same natural disasters, earthquakes, um, typhoons, sometimes in Japan more tsunamis. So if we can fund these projects together, and these tools can be used across the two countries, then we have a base for funding this ecosystem to go forward, right? And for them to actually deliver some results, ongoing results that will be meaningful and useful for future generations and for us. So that was basically, hopefully, we were trying to see that the ways we can basically help. But I think that's basically it. So in summary, I think I did talk about how GovZero started, how this open source community started, how the kind of problems they're facing, the ways, the various ways we try to help, and we try to build projects and resources, bringing resources into the community. And then at this point, we don't know if it's gonna work, but at least we're trying to raise fund with this endowment fund model that hopefully can sustain these kind of communities. And the bigger vision of this endowment fund is basically every fund can sustain one public goods ecosystem, right? GovZero or Code for Japan is just one example. If we can raise fund for all the different like ecosystem communities, then they will have a better way to sustain. So these, we do think, might be a way to go forward in either the citizens or people to get more involved in either digital or non-digital public goods building. So yeah, that's so far my 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 um, my chat. And let me look at the questions on this side. Post-impact funding is less risky than pre-impact funding. Makes sense, but I don't understand what the impact certificates were purchasing. Right. So you can think of it as just like a stock, right? Stock shares that companies issue to its employees somehow. So if you make certain contributions, they will give you an impact certificate, just like companies give people stocks, stock shares, give people shares. And if that impact certificate can be like shares can be purchased and sold and bought on secondary market, then somebody may come and buy that impact, and to say that, okay, I should purchase this impact because this effort delivered certain impact in the market. And there were some like assumptions that who would be buying these kind of impact, right? One was that the big philanthropist would might want to do this because if Bill Gates is giving money to certain foundations to do something that hasn't happened, he might be willing to incentivize people to buy impact certificates to incentivize people to make impact successfully, right? So that's one assumption. I think the other assumption was from corporations that if you buy these kind of impacts, then um, then if you purchase this impact, then it can be somehow connected to ESG and all that. I think there's still a big gap there because how ESGs are counted and stuff that's still to be determined. The third way I think people are talking about was that how might we combine impact with, for example, art, NFTs, and all that stuff. Because if you think about it, when people buy art, they're actually buying the connection, or they're buying the story behind it, or they're buying the way they want the world to be. So maybe that kind of impact uh, uh, can be connected with the art industry in some ways. The NFT art would come with these impact embedded already. So those are the possibilities. So Christina said the mass map iterating fast at the start of the pandemic. Do you have any examples for the hackathon of how building open source impact? Um, I know how it works now. I know how the hackathons work now. I'm not entirely sure how it has evolved over the years. And I think the mask map, so for the mask map specifically, there are not just one team building the mask map. And I think it's very interesting because there are like 6 to 7 teams all building mask maps, and all of their codes are open sourced. So they were basically leveraging each other's open source codes and basically just building on top of each other. And that's why these projects are iterating very fast. I think that's one of the reasons. And it's not even a collaboration. They basically just look at each other's code, and if useful, I'll just use it. And for the users to decide which tools they want to use for their own purposes. So I think the culture definitely helps, and definitely is best exemplified during the COVID process, because there is a lot of need, and because everyone still stick to the original principles being open source. And so I think that's the fast iteration, where the fast iteration came from. Yeah, and a little more about hyper search. Yes, thank you, Christina. That's the link, and that's the name indeed. So a little more about hyper search. So hyper search is kind of in not not to say it's not it's kind of little bit stagnant now. And the reason being that the original intent from Procolabs is for it to be uh, bought and sold on secondary markets, right? But because of the regulations of the SEC, so Procolabs is now separating HyperSearch uh, uh, operations into this organization called HyperSearch Foundation. And so, but HyperSearch Foundation also, there's the worry that it will be considered a security within the under the SEC or the sort assumption. So they've been the evolution of the iteration of the projects probably can be faster, but there are a lot of worries and concerns in that front. So, but there are like other so they're still trying to find a way, and there are still other like considerations and experimentations in other places because hypersearch is also open source, right? So there are other people who just basically took the code and tried to make it can be bought and sold on secondary markets. So there are limitations and challenges there on their front too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Scouts to find project. So for the GovZero, if we're talking about the GovZero experiment, we consider ourselves a project as well. So we went on stage, we proposed, and we see which projects would like to join. So I wouldn't say scouting is basically just giving people the information, and whoever wants to join. And also there's a application process because we need them to provide wallet addresses, that we need them to create wallet addresses, that, and hence that's the application process for. And for the Dragon Fund, the disaster prevention fund that we're building right now, we're still basically discussing because we're not raising funds. We're basically raising funds from, for example, big companies like they're both existing Japan, Taiwan, for example, like Dentsu, or for example, like a couple others, especially insurance company, right? Because they will have they will have an interest in disaster prevention, and this is an innovation that they might want to partake into. And because this is early stage, we're still in the pitching stage, around fundraising stage. So they're basically, I think the biggest question is how are we sure that these projects can deliver actual impact, especially that it's going through a projected funding or projected voting process, right? We don't even know which project the funding will be going to. But as we explained to them, the project, the funding will be going to the ones that made the biggest impact based on certain process that you will see as well, and a lot from all the experiments in Web3 and other places. But still, the biggest problem with open source projects is that sometimes they simply don't deliver, right? They don't have enough resources or enough commitments to see it through. Sometimes open source projects like that, and sometimes if you have a lot of momentum, they will push through, right? But not always the case, and because they are not directly getting funding, so they usually are not responsible for delivering a result, right? So I think that's one of the challenge that we're facing. So there's probably going to be a selection process of what kind of projects, if it's open source, if it's for disaster prevention, if it fits both criteria, how do we pick these projects so we can have a batch of credible projects that we can pitch to the Dentsu or whoever, so they would think this probably is money well spent. But it is actually, on the other hand, it is not money spent because they're putting money into this pool. It will generate a profit or a revenue. We only use the profits, and these companies can take this money away at any time. Maybe not any time. Maybe quarterly they can make a decision if they want their money still in this pool. Right. So that's also something that's quite new and that needs some communication with these big companies as well. So there are a lot of like nuances that's different from traditional methods that we are thinking about how we can communicate this better. Yeah, a lot of complexities and a lot of, but I think this is worth doing because um, if you think about it, I do believe that if something like this can, we can demo this in a successful way, then there will be a lot of like similar funds that will come out and that will fund all these different like ecosystems that originally doesn't have um, a business model, right? And these things are actually quite important, and funding usually only comes from the government for public goods. But the government can only do so much, and the government sometimes shows what they think is important, but actually maybe not that important to the people. It is a conundrum, right? So it is important for us to build the public goods for ourselves. I think that's also one thing that people do need to, the future society would need to encompass. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Christina. Um, thank you. Cool. Should I just wrap up or should I um, do anything else? Cool. Okay. I guess I'll just wrap up. So thank you, Josh. Christina. And yeah, whoever would like to contact me, I am Noah Yeah everywhere. NOAHYH, Twitter, Telegram, wherever, all the same. So feel free to find me. Yes. Cool. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Bye bye.